Well, we're going to get started. Welcome to the Lyall 50.
We're live, I take it?
We are live, and if you're home, and I know there are people watching from home, welcome.
Should we wave to them?
Yeah, we can wait. How are you? Wish you were here. I've got people lighting up my phone here. That's a common occurrence, in the pulpit where people are talking to me.
Really?
Because they're watching. They're watching, they talk to me. Yeah. So it was a little distressing at first, but I'm getting
Do you
used to it.
listen?
Sometimes. If it keeps going off, I know somebody's, begging me to stop saying what I'm saying. But anyway, welcome. How about if we have a little prayer? We'll have a prayer before we get started. Reading the Bible and prayer is a good idea. So let's. Gracious God, we thank you for your grace. We thank you for providing us with your word. We ask that you would give us the imagination and the empathy and the courage to enter it. We know that your ways are definitely not our ways. And so we ask that you would help us with the exchange through Christ our Lord. Amen. So, I think Bible study is best in a group. It doesn't have to be a huge group. But there's something about the synergy of concerned minds that make the experience a lot better than by yourself, me included. I've written a little something about how I was raised in the Bible with a group of students, always asking, dumb questions. And we provided atmosphere. We didn't know this at the time, of course, but because we're kids. But we provided the atmosphere where that can happen. And none of us went to church. I didn't go to church until I was 20. So we were reading the Bible really for the first time. And we would literally read to each other. And somebody else, so I'd say, well, I read this week. And I'd read my old passage, let's say. And there's no lesson. There's no lesson whatsoever, never was, for 25 years. People would come with a passage that they read and liked or didn't like or wondered about and said so, and said why. So they read the passage, and they would respond to it. Somebody else would respond to it. And then invariably, someone else would say, well, I read something like that this week in the Bible. And they would read their passage. So what we came to understand when I was in my 20s is we call that a thematic study of the Bible. We didn't do that on purpose, but that is in fact what happened. And I've been doing that ever since. Why do I do that? Obviously I went to seminary and everything else. Very, very, very structured environment. But there's something transformative that can happen in a Bible study like that. So we'll figure out how we want to do it. But I want you to know that you're safe. You're safe here. You can say whatever you want. You can wonder. You can not like it. Everything is okay. All right? So why don't we get started? Does anybody have any questions or comments or wondering?
I didn't understand what it means, the themes.
What I tried to do, Mrs. Bennett, is sorry?
Are there 50 themes? Is that it?
There's 50 passages, and in those passages, in some of them, there are a number of themes
Okay.
that break down. And Jim asked Susan if she would print out the actual passage, which may be helpful. So listen, this first week is on me. Next week it'll be on Jim, and he gets all the fun passages.
All the
horrible passages.
Cain, Abel.
So Cain and Abel and all this. Yeah. So it's really nice to be able to do this with someone who knows. And so anyway. So let's start with the first story. And it is, predictably, Genesis, the very beginning, Genesis 1 through chapter 2, 3. We're not going to do that whole, we're not going to read that whole bit, that's too much, but would anyone like to say something about the word Genesis? When you hear that word, what do you hear?
The beginning.
Beginning, yeah. Anybody else want to chime in?
A fancy car from Honda?
Sorry?
A fancy car from Honda.
Is it?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it is.
Isn't it?
Genesis.
A
I don't
Genesis?
know where they picked up, why they picked up that.
Well, that's interesting, yeah.
That's
They
a
would
pretty
use
good car.
that word.
I saw it spelled different the other day. Instead of S-I-S, S-Y-S. And it was
Oh.
somebody's name.
Oh, really?
Huh. Okay. Beginnings. That's the word Genesis. Beginnings has never happened before. The idea of beginning. When they wrote that down, when that was written down, that had never happened before. This is what we miss being Westerners and living in the 21st century. The whole idea of history was cyclical. Nowhere and at no time in no culture had there been an idea that there was a beginning of time, and we're going to see shortly, and there's an end of time. All other religions, all other cultures saw time as cyclical. It's the first time where there's a beginning. It's a linear thing and an ending. What change is possible? What kind of changes are possible, or worries, if that's the case?
Well, that the word gets changed or corrupted in some way. Yes, people may want to try to improve it.
Okay.
You're saying over time.
Yeah, over time. Yeah. Anybody else?
Don't get another chance to do something.
There you go. And that creates what?
Stress,
Stress,
fear, dread.
fear, dread, anxiety,
Mhm.
and also,
A little hopelessness in a sense.
say more about that?
Well, you don't have another chance at it, so like you did it and you could be doomed.
Right. So that's kind of the dark side of linear time. There's a beginning and an end. Is there a positive angle on this? What's positive about it?
Well, I always find it's nice to know that there's an ending. It's like, oh, finally it's over.
Okay, all right, yeah, okay.
If your situation is bad and there's an end to it, it's sort of a relief.
Mhm. This too shall
Mm-hmm.
pass. How precious is the day then, if you know you're not going to get another one like this? If you see life as cyclical, you're going to get another day, just like this. Eventually, this time, circles back. Hakuna Matata. I mean, you don't have a sense of dread because you're going to get the day again. Don't worry about it. So, but in this case, every day is a treasure. It matters that we live this day out because you're not going to get another one. Not like this. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So the Jewish people created our sense of time. And it happens right in the beginning. In the beginning. You see, does everybody understand that? So you get promise, you get a treasured day, and you get dread. Anxiety. All together. Is that your human experience about your life?
Different points in your life.
Right? We hear this, well, kind of from our parents or from others too. What did you do in your life? If you have a cyclical understanding of history, you don't have to answer it. It only happens when you have a beginning and you have an end. Okay? So let's read it. Can we read? And just notice repetitions, repeated words, that sort of thing. And we'll see what we can do. Would someone read Genesis 1:1 through verse 5? Somebody want to do that for us?
I will.
Okay.
There are 6 days of creation and the Sabbath. In the beginning, when God created the heavens and the earth was a formless void, and darkness covered the face of the deep, while a wind from God swept over the face of the waters. Then God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. And God saw that the light was good, and God separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening and there was morning, the first day.
Okay. Thank you, Karen. What did you see in that? Is that a really familiar passage? What did you see? Did you see anything new here?
The very beginnings of creation.
Mm-hmm. And how'd it go? What's involved?
Dark and light.
So the
Light
separate.
being day and dark being night.
Okay. Did you see the word separation? Separated? Okay, what do you think about that word, separated? God's separating. How important is it for things to be separate?
Well, they need to be separate to be in their purest form, shall we say, so they're clearly distinguished from that from which they were separated. It's interesting, he saw that the light was good. So it was so good that he wanted to get it away from the darkness. And that's kind of a theme throughout the Bible about darkness being not of God and light being of God.
Mm-hmm. If I were to ask, what are the actions of God? What does God do in this passage? What is God doing?
Light represents good and darkness represents, dark or evil.
Maybe.
He doesn't say evil.
Well, I'm wondering, what is God doing? The first thing he's doing is hovering, right? Isn't that interesting?
Mm-hmm.
That God's spirit, God's wind, it's the same word in Hebrew. Ruah, it's wind, spirit. It's similar in the Greek too, by the way. God is hovering. That's kind of interesting, isn't it? Has God ever hovered over you?
Probably, but
Probably.
I don't know.
But it's interesting, isn't it? Interesting. This God hovers. What else is God doing? There's several things God is doing that's kind of interesting and maybe unique.
He's creating out of nothing.
He's creating out of nothing. Creating out of nothing.
Well, I want to just mention something I just noticed in this passage that says, the earth was a formless void and darkness covered the face of the deep, while the wind from God swept over the face of the waters. I didn't know there was water
Mm-hmm.
then.
Mm-hmm. There's water.
Mm-hmm.
And in the Jewish culture, the seas are terribly frightening. And that's why in the ancient world, Jewish sailors hugged to the coast. They wouldn't go out any further. They're going to be as close as they can see land, which is about 15 miles. They're not going to go any further than that because it's chaos under there. It's chaos. Yeah. So the tohu wabohu, the chaos that God's Spirit hovers over. And then what else is, I want to stick with this thing about God's action. What else is God doing? So he's hovering, he's creating.
He's making the judgment.
Say more. What kind of judgment?
Well, the light is good. That's a judgment.
Yeah, that's right.
He doesn't say the darkness is bad, but it's sort of implied.
We're gonna see judgment in every day of creation. There's a judgment about the creation. And so the word is good. The Hebrew word is tov. It's good. It's full. It's the way it should be. Light. Is that me?
That's me.
That's you.
Yes, you forgot to turn it on.
So when you, this is one of the troubles that I've had, maybe you do too, is that I don't have the same judgment as God. Because I think sometimes the world is horrible. But here we're going to see every day of creation that God makes a judgment, and every day it's good. How do you feel about that? When you think about the world, and when you think about the creation, is it good?
Sometimes.
Sometimes, right? So we qualify it, right? God doesn't qualify it here. That might be a prayer concern. You know, have a little prayer with God about our judgments. You say this, I say this. Yeah? Okay, so God hovers, God creates, God judges, and what else does God do?
I think God, at this point, it seems to me, since he was hovering, he wasn't really involved. He was more in the observational mode, perhaps.
In the beginning, for sure, right?
In the beginning,
Right.
yeah, he was, like just taking a look at it. But then he starts to add order and structure
Yeah.
and meaning to his creation.
Mm-hmm.
And he's defining it further and further as he starts to go through the various calling out of what his creation consists of.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so he's organizing.
Yeah.
I'm doing this for a reason, right? He's hovering, he's judging, he's separating, he's organizing, what else is going on?
He's naming.
Naming, great. You want to say more about that?
Well,
How important is that? I'm just saying that for the writers of this, they mean business when they're writing this stuff down. It's really important to them. So, we have to kind of get into their heads a little bit. Why is naming so important?
you have to have a common understanding of what you're talking about. So you have to name things, so you know exactly what you're talking about.
Mm-hmm. It's part of the organization, maybe,
Mm-hmm.
is naming things. What if you misname something? We name things all the time, right?
A lot of confusion.
A lot of confusion. Does naming sometimes involve value?
Mhm.
Right? In our other class at 1 o'clock, black usually is negative. Right? Is that true?
Sure.
Yes.
Right? Down is negative. Up is good. Light is positive. Darkness is negative. Right? When we name things, often, not always, but often, there's a value that follows it. And so how you name things in your own life, let's say, is really important. Have you ever misnamed anything about your own life? I'm stupid. You're being named. I'm lost. I'm hurt. I'm depressed. If you go to therapy, often what will happen, or if you just have a good friend, is they will reframe by renaming what's going on in your life. You're not lost, you're just searching. You see the difference?
Big
You just
difference.
There's a big difference, right? One is you're stuck, you're not going anywhere. The other is you're on your way. Same experience, same person, just a different name, and with it comes a different value. We say in the Christian church, we sometimes live a cruciform life. Meaning we live on something that certainly feels like and we experience something like a cross. But in the Christian tradition, the cross is a preamble to resurrection. You see what I mean? Reframes it. So if you're not a Christian, let's say, you're just out in public, and you say, gosh, life is just one cross after the next. You don't have the reframing, the renaming. So, and that's why we wear crosses all the time. It's not because we want to hang on a cross. We're saying, that's a prelude to resurrection. There's purpose in suffering, in other words. Right? Does that make more sense? You've got to rename what's going on. And then the other thing I want to bring up is how God creates, how God does it. All the other gods at this time are procreating, and that's how they create stuff. That's how they make stuff. They procreate. They meet up, and they have these children called Mars and Jupiter and so on. This God doesn't do it that way. How does this God create?
He speaks.
By his word.
Speaks. That's new. That's never happened before in any religion, where God will speak and worlds will be created. How important are words to you? Have you experienced that too, where words have created and words have destroyed?
The old saying is words can hurt. Depending on, it can be positive or it can be negative.
Yeah, what do you think about it? Are you thinking of sticks and stones may break my bones, but words can not hurt me? But that's not so, is it? Have you ever been hurt by a word?
Everybody's been hurt by it.
Right?
Many times.
Have you ever been built up by a word? Has a word created something for you?
Mhm.
Yeah? Yeah, this is a very strange action of God to speak and create. Does he ever do it again?
All 7 days.
All 7 days? When else? When else does God create or start something new just by a word?
Jesus' conception.
Exactly. Good one. Huge one, right? Yeah. I've said this before. You go to Italy, you see all these paintings of the archangel speaking into the ear of Mary. That's how she gets pregnant. She gets pregnant through God's word. That's how it works. Even yesterday in worship with Abram and Sarah, how does God kick that off?
Well, he told them to get moving, and later on he'll change their names.
Yeah. He speaks.
So he's speaking directly to them.
God speaks.
And again, where a name becomes very meaningful.
That's right. Yeah, for sure. What do you think of that? How important are words?
are important.
Do you have a speech that you love, that someone has spoken? By a famous person? Is there something you're drawn to?
John F. Kennedy's, ask not what your country can do for you. Roosevelt's, this is a date which will live in infamy.
Yeah,
Martin Luther King, I have a dream.
yeah. 70 years ago, right? We don't even have to give the speaker, it's so well known. Words create worlds. Now, here's another issue about another facet of words. Who owns the words? Can anyone say anything? Can only God speak?
No,
Who can speak?
everyone can speak.
Welcome to the United States of America.
They
Right?
may not
First
be saying
Amendment.
the right thing, but they can
Right.
speak.
Can you see, I mean, you'll see some parallels maybe with the country too, how these discussions have been going on for hundreds of years. And especially kind of, in Western society with the Reformation. Who can speak is a basic human question. And people would go back to this very thing, how important words are, and then the obvious question is, who can speak? Is it just God who can speak? Is it just the king who can speak? Is it just the wealthy and powerful who can speak? Who can speak? It's a really basic question about people, and so the very first amendment that we have is freedom of speech. It's so important. It's so important to be able to tell your truth, to be able to have an opportunity to reframe one's life, or even maybe reframe your community's life, or even your country's life. Famous speeches are famous because they reframe what's going on, right? Even I think it's brilliant what Donald Trump did. Make America great again. I mean, that is powerful, right? It's really powerful. He grabbed onto something that people were feeling, and maybe they weren't able to say it,
Yeah.
but he was able to say it, right? You got to give him credit for that, absolutely, for sure. He got that right. It was like a lightning bolt when he said it. What about Ronald Reagan? Mr. Gorbachev? Tear down this wall, right? I mean, there's a lot of things. And that was, when that speech happened, it was the beginning of the end of the Soviet Union, when he spoke those words. Yes? I got that right? I think so. I think so. Words matter. Words create worlds. Have you ever had an encounter with another person? Somebody you love? I know somebody who kept saying, I'm the black sheep of the family. That was her thing. And she said it all the time. It was a mantra. I'm the black sheep, I'm the black sheep, I'm the black sheep. Finally, I said to her, you're the hero. You're not the black sheep. And it was like knocking her over with words. And I said, you have a black sheep in your family, but it's not you, it's your brother. He's the black sheep. You're the hero. And things really changed. And once you hear it, you can't unhear it. Right? It kind of worms its way into our hearts. Has anyone ever said something to you where it's like, what? About you that reframed you? I remember coming back from Amsterdam, and I was not the best student in the seminary, and that's a big surprise. But after that year, I went back. I had another year to go, and So I said to Virgil Cruz, who I mentioned yesterday, I said, well, why did you pick me? I said, there's a lot of really smart, and my particular class had many, many smart students who went on to get their PhDs and blah, 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 all that kind of stuff. Really disciplined, really great students, great minds, and nice people too. I said, why did you pick me? He said, because you didn't know you were one of them. And he said, now you know. Pointing his finger at me, I'll never forget it. Now you know. Now what? What are you going to do with that? You know, you think you're just a kid from Fruitland Township. But that was a big change. Now you know. You can't unhear it. Okay? So that's a lot. We read, what, 5 verses? Just a little nothing. And we come up with all sorts of actions of God. Hovering, naming, separating, organizing, speaking, judging. That's a lot of action in a very short period of time. And that's one of the things I love about the Bible is it's packed with stuff. And they're writing this on purpose. They want us to ask, this God speaks, and things happen. This is how God creates. They want us to ask, are you kidding? God is judging this world to be good? Even though we have a different experience, God is going to call it good from the very beginning. What are you kidding me? God is going to start history and end it? Are you kidding me? It's all written on purpose to get us thinking about our lives and about God. Okay?
Who
Sure.
wrote this?
Huh?
Who wrote Genesis?
Great question. I was going to get at that after this one little section. But this is the backstory of Genesis. Genesis was the book of Genesis and Exodus and Leviticus. So most of them, the first 5 books of the Bible, but especially this section, was written about 4,000 years ago. They think these were oral stories. These were stories that were talked about around a fire, and so on. These are, and as stories do, they get more and more refined. They get more condensed. The more you work at it, and then so these were oral stories for a long time, and then something happened. And it's called the Babylonian captivity. Babylon, in let's say 600 BC, comes down and is taking over one country after the next, and eventually they get to Palestine, and they defeat the Jews in Palestine. And what the Babylonians do, they don't slaughter everybody, they slaughtered a lot of people, but they try to take the cream of the crop, anybody that's got talent, and they took them back. They took all those Jewish talented people back to Babylon. And the Jewish people that were now taken away asked these huge questions, like the Book of Lamentations is about this. They said to one another, we're never going home again. We're going to die here in Babylon. So we better write these stories down. And that's when these stories went from oral tradition to written tradition. Okay? So what makes this even, I think another layer of this is a pastoral layer, meaning these people thought their story was going to come to an end in Babylon. But as they're writing this, every day, God judges it as good. They must have swallowed hard, don't you think? Mm-hmm. With that one, swallowed really hard. Because it wasn't very good in Babylon. They were away from home, they were lost. They weren't lost, but they had lost all their institutions and everything. They were just lost. Done. Story's over. while they're writing all these stories down in Genesis that have to do with the creation being good, that separation is good, they were separated already, and on and on. That's the background. Okay?
Thank you.
But here's the thing. Once you write something down, what happens when you have you have like family stories, don't you? Everybody's got family stories. And they're oral stories usually. They can shift and move pretty easily, can't they? That was Aunt Tilly, that wasn't Uncle Frank that said that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And you can see that they're
Often they're embellished.
very much so, right? But as soon as you write it down, what happens?
It's fossilized.
It's fossilized, exactly. I mean, there it is. Now you might want to tweak it a little bit, but once you write a story down, it becomes
Written in
fossilized.
stone.
It's written in stone, right? So it loses its elan, you know. So that's the background. Okay, well, can we take a look at, what's our time? Oh, we're doing all right.
John, before you go on, that you mentioned before you discussed Genesis, you're talking about what you were saying just now about it being going from oral to written, but you also talk about mythical, and understand it, because mythical or myths are often viewed as a negative because they're not true.
Yeah.
They're just made up.
Exactly, yeah. Yeah, if you go outside this building and somebody says, oh, that's just a myth, it's like fake news, you know, it's just made up. It's, you know, there's no truth to it. There's no evidence to support it. It's just a story, you know, there's nothing to it. When we talk about myth in the Christian tradition, and Jewish tradition also, what we're talking about this is that a myth, and maybe we should use a different word, a myth is a universal story that has to do with every single person. So in other words, this story in Genesis is your story. So you can break it right down. All right? Are you in chaos? Is there tohu wabohu in your life? Do you need separation of some kind? We talk about in the psych world of individuation. Do you know that word? Individuation. You become your own person. You're separate then. You're you. Is that true in your life? That's important? Is it true that if you're going through, you know, your own version of the Babylonian captivity, that you still can say, you can stand up to the world and say, the creation is good, people are good, in spite of the evidence? You see what I mean? It's a universal story in that way. Do you need to separate light from darkness in your own life, in your own community, in your own family? You know, this is what I mean by universal. What's happening here happens to us. Does that make sense? That's why it's mythical in nature.
Yeah, perhaps you could add to that something you said from the pulpit many times, that the Bible is teaching, is concerned with, what is it, who and why?
Who and why, yeah, who and why.
Or something.
Right, yeah, that's a good point too. Yeah, we are Westerners. We love science. I mean, some people do. Most of us do, I guess. We love science and history in the Western world, right? And that's how we derive truth. It's through science and history. And so if it didn't happen, it's not true. If you can't prove it scientifically, it's not true. Right? When you leave the building, when you leave this building, that's how this operates out here. And indeed, that is a way to derive truth, right? The Bible derives truth using two different questions, and that is who's involved, who is God, Who is important. And why. And science cannot answer the question, why. They can tell us how things work from an engineering point of view. They can talk about the universe and how it works. They can talk about the Big Bang when they think that happened. But they can't answer the question, why do we exist? Who is God? Who am I as a human being? They can't go there. Their discipline won't go there. And for my money, that's the primary reason why I went into theology. Is I was preoccupied and transfixed by the question who and why. And I still am. Does that make sense? So, but I would also say those questions are really important, and I'm really glad science and historians are working on things. I think I'm interested in that too. I think it's great to know how things work. I think it's wonderful to know when things happened. I don't dismiss that at all, but they're limited. And we're limited too, because you're going to see here, even when we say God uses speech, we don't really know how that worked. You see what I mean? And the Bible is not going to tell us how Jesus was resurrected from the dead. We don't get a breakdown of how that happened from a biological point of view. We don't get information because it doesn't care about that. It cares about who and why. So once I separated those things out, the seminary helped me with this, by the way. I had a professor who had a PhD in physics and a PhD in theology, Chris Kaiser, and he really helped separate those out. Those are all really good questions, really important questions. But we are here in seminary to work on who and why.
That's good.
Okay, is that
It
clear?
really helped me understand when there's criticism of the Bible from a non-theological side,
Yeah,
they're not using those criteria. They're using the criteria
that's,
of what and how.
yeah, it's their discipline,
Yeah.
and okay, I think that's fine, but, and I would ask
But
them,
they're measuring the wrong thing.
that's it, that's exactly it, yeah. And so we can all live in, I think, in harmony. I think the one thing all of us have in common is wonder. Whether you're a physicist, whether you're a doctor, whether you're a lawyer, whether you're a historian, whether you're a theologian, whether you're a teacher, whether you're just a regular person, I think all of us have a capacity for wonder. And that's a good place to start, don't you think? Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a way to begin a conversation. I'm not full of wonder maybe to the extent that you are when you're looking at the physical world. But I'm over here talking about, or thinking about a resurrection of a person, and the hope that it gives us. We can all share wonder. It's okay. That's been terribly helpful, I would say. I would say the one discipline that we have, that theologians and maybe Christians have, the one discipline where we argue the most and have the most friction is with psychologists. Because they want to take the why from us. And we think we know a little bit more about why than they do. Since we've been around a little longer. It's kind of a baby discipline. It hasn't been around very long. So, but they're all kind of puffed up and think they know. We had a lot of fun talking about that at Pioneers. Okay, shall we, it's 10, yeah, we've got time. Can we take a look at the second day? Somebody read just 6 through 8. They're just tiny little passages,
Oh, okay. And God said, let there be a dome in the midst of the waters, and let it separate the waters from the waters. So God made the dome and separated the waters that were under the dome from the waters that were above the dome. And it was so. God called the dome sky, and there was evening and there was morning, the second day.
Okay, thank you. What do we see in the second day that we already saw in the first? What's-
Water.
Water? What else do we see?
Separation.
There you go. Anything
And
else?
God doing his work.
God is generating this. Yeah. Anything else? That's similar from the first day.
He's naming.
Naming. Judging. He saw that it was good. That's a judgment.
Where does it say that?
I've got
It
that
doesn't
in,
say that.
sorry, no, I'm sorry. Yeah. I was in the first day. I'm fogging up here.
Yeah, he doesn't say that in that.
No, there's not a
Second
judgment
day.
there. Yeah.
You're saying about judgment?
Mhm.
Well, the judgment is not, in the sense we're using condemnation, is it? It's, the judgment is, and God saw it was good. At the end of 10. Isn't that the judgment?
That's the third day.
Oh,
I'm raising this question of similarities of days because.
oh, you're right.
Sorry.
Of course you're right.
Oh, they're
Well, no,
above
but-
and below?
Sorry.
Above and below?
Yeah, separating out. They're trying to figure out what's above. It's blue sky, right? So maybe that's water. So maybe God is separating out sky from sky, the above sky and the below, or the above water and the below water, I should say. But there's separation going on. One of the things that a lot of biblical scholars will say is that every day of creation is liturgical. There's very similar material in each day, and it's rhythmic, isn't it? So far, is it rhythmic? You'll get that by the end. You'll be able to make it up yourself. It's rhythmic. It has to do, and this was incorporated in worship. And this is what happens when you do things for hundreds of years. I mean, the Episcopalians or the Catholics, for instance, right? These things have been put into repetition for so many years that you could, if you're a Catholic who's been around for a long time, you can just waltz in there and do it without any paper. You're just, because it's in your bones. And that's the sense that we get with this too. So they're not writing history here, again. They're not writing history. They're writing theology and liturgy. Okay? And you'll see that. Why don't we go to the next day and see if we can sort of prove that point. Somebody want to read 9 through 13? Karen, you want to do that? You want to be the voice of Scripture today?
Okay. And God said, let the waters under the sky be gathered together into one place, and let the dry land appear. And it was so. God called the dry land earth, and the waters that were gathered together he called seas. And God saw that it was good. And God said, let the earth put forth vegetation, plants yielding seed, and fruit trees of every kind on earth that bear fruit with the seed in it. And it was so. The earth brought forth vegetation, plants yielding seed of every kind and trees of every kind bearing fruit with the seed in it. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening and there was morning, the third day.
Okay. See the rhythm? Starting to see the rhythm now? At the third day, the rhythm is established. And God said, and it was so. Now, I want to sort of introduce a concept, and that with all of this, the entire Bible, I would say, and the entire Christian faith, you know, you can get this right. You can get it all right. I've had professors that are brilliant, and they know how this all breaks down. And at the end of the day, they say, well, that's nice, except it's not true. Go to Princeton, and you can hear them. Go to Union Seminary, you can hear them. You can go to Yale Divinity, you can hear them. You definitely can hear it at Harvard Divinity. Yeah, they're experts in their field, and at the end of the day, they'll say, yeah, that's nice, but it's not true. Here's an example. If God, in these passages, every day, or nearly every day, and we get, and God said, and it was so. They're trying to make a point here that when God says something, it's so. Is that true?
Of course.
This coming from son of a preacher.
Yes.
Right, well, if you go outside the building, you're going to get a lot of different answers. Well, that's lovely. I have, for the last 40 years. Well, that's great. That sounds great, but it's not true.
Again, by what criteria are you measuring what was done? Is it
God's
what now? Or
well, they'll say things like, well, if God creates such a wonderful creation, what the heck happened? It's not great anymore. And so you talk about human sin, I've had plenty of opportunity to meet people who will say to me, well, that's great, God loves us, but he must have missed when it came to me. Right? That's great, but it's not true. You see what I mean? Yeah, it's a real, the more you get to know them, and maybe
They're personalizing everything.
yeah, well, this is personal too, right? And here are the Jewish people in Babylon writing this down. As I said, they must have been swallowing pretty hard. These are our sacred stories about the world and everybody in it, and we're not living it. Life is not good for us in Babylon. It's not true for us. What we're writing down is not true for us. And you get that in churches too. People come to church for years and they hear that God is gracious and good, forgiving, and they don't feel any of it. There's a disconnect. This is what it says. Sure it does. But it's not true. People like that. I know lots and lots and lots of people like that.
But in a sense, there's always like a good and a bad. So right now, the Babylonian Jews were experiencing the bad. Others were experiencing the good. Probably Babylonians, So there is God's still doing that. But they're at the bad end of it.
Well, there's an issue of time, isn't there? Because the Jewish people that were taken off to Babylon, eventually, they never thought they were going to get home. but Cyrus of Persia impossibly comes down and defeats the Babylonians. And what Cyrus does, impossibly, he does the exact opposite of what the Babylonians do. And that is, he sends them all home. So they go home. And it's a great way to, it's like the Marshall Plan is how Cyrus did his work. It's a great way to make friends, don't you think? And allies. And that's exactly what happened.
Yeah, and with all the grain trusts being returned to the land, they would become more productive, more prosperous.
Yeah.
Thus, they could pay more taxes.
They can make it
So it all works out.
Right, it's a great idea. So, so you could, have you ever known somebody that's gone through real difficult times, and they're at a point where they say, well, it's not true, or at least it's not true for me. And over time, things change. I'm thinking about couples that can't have kids, and lo and behold, years later, after they give up, they have kids, they have children, or they'll adopt, and then they have their own biological children. That kind of thing happens. There's time that we have to deal with. Abram and Sarai, they get the promise from God that they'll become a great nation, that those that follow them and their family will be so great they can't count them. They'll be like sand on the sea. But there's a hunk of time where that's not going to be experienced, where they say to each other and to God, your promise is null and void. It's not for me. It's not true for me. And then God does something in God's time. Okay, I think we've done enough for today. So Jim, you're on for next week. What do you want to take it from here? Where are you going today?
Well, it looks like we're ready for Adam and Eve in the garden, right?
Yep.
That's right. Really touched on that.
So you want to start with that? That's page 5, right? And we'll go as far as we can, right?
Yeah.
Till 12.
Yeah. Well, we'll probably, we'll certainly get through Genesis 6 to Nephilim. May not get to the Tower of Babel.
Okay. We'll do the best we can. I do want to encourage you, I know this is sort of verboten for a lot of people who have Bibles, but I think it's really great if you underline your Bible, mark it up. Put words in there, circle words that are repeated. I do that with all my books. I just mark them up like crazy. That's what, in my view, that's what makes a Bible holy, is when you interact with it. Otherwise, it just sits there. It's something to consider. I know, people have, they want to be respectful, and I understand that, but I do think that Bibles need to be marked up. Okay? Great. Thank you for coming.
Fine.
Good.